April data shows how deep COVID-19 has rocked South Africa's economy. Last month followed the same script as March. Some economists say, introducing one scene after another that market participants have either never seen before or not in their lifetime. Meanwhile, the coronavirus and the lockdown have disrupted almost all forms of our daily life, and some pundits say it's likely to have an impact on next year's local government elections. We reported that while political leaders appeared united on the onset of the pandemic, the cracks are beginning to show along party lines in level 4. Joining me now to discuss this, political economist Professor Somadoda. Fikeni, a very good evening to you, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Is it far-fetched to say, as much as we talk about a new normal, meaning that the ramifications of COVID-19 will far surpass our lifetime, that the same can be said about the politics in this country and indeed governance structures?
There is no doubt that this seismic event is going to have a profound impact on our political landscape within the ruling party and across the political landscape. It's still too early to tell what it will do right now because we're in this particular situation in a long haul. First, there is how the health issue has been managed, and what will follow will be how the economic reconstruction of the society will be managed. So right now we can say it has given government an opportunity, particularly President Ramaphosa, to take the center stage, to mobilize. But this will not last for too long once we start dealing with the economic realities.
I mean, there's been a lot of literature, especially post-2008, on the role of the state, especially in a financial crisis, and many people pointing it to the problem with capitalism. But this kind of position that we find ourselves in, not only global governance, but if we're looking at South Africa itself, how would you categorize it? What are we looking at, especially in terms of how the state itself has been disturbed?
I do think that this is the beginning of the end of the global system that we've seen. It survived in 2008. That is your global market system and neoliberalism as we know it right now. This event is so deep and wide that it will change so many things, commerce, trade. It will change the interaction between states. Therefore, I can liken it to the post-Second World War period when new global systems will have to be set up. Some continental arrangements, such as the European Union, may not survive this, or if they survive, they'll be so weakened. The issue of open trade. So right now, this is the biggest test that global capitalism and neoliberalism, or even globalization, as we have come to see it, has ever seen. And there will be many changes. The key thing is, will Africa be on the table this time around when the changes are made? Because in the past, changes were made, Africa was nowhere because it was mainly colonized.
And just looking at those visuals of long lines, I want you to place this within the COVID-19 scenario. Some researcher writing that they reject the categorization of what they say is post-conflict, saying that because conflict is ubiquitous and a normal condition in human society, often driving development in progressive directions. Is this where we're going as South Africa, given the huge inequalities that are not only being laid bare, but just how bad it is?
I do think that South Africa will just have to be brutally honest about its own condition, because going through COVID-19, the situation was already bad. Our inequality levels were quite high. We were undergoing a downgrade. And also our economy, some of us have long argued that for the sections of our population, this has always been depression, not just recession, or not even deep recession. And the other issue is that it's compounded by the fact that apartheid and colonial geography has hardly been profoundly shaken. When you have a crisis of this nature, South Africa will have to use that to restructure its economy and make sure that on the other side of COVID-19, we start having a new deal or a new social compact in which an inclusive economic growth and development and people-centered economy will be key in a transformed setting. But if we return to business as usual, then you can expect social and political, disorder.
And I'm glad you say that, Prof, because the question then comes back to our political landscape. How much has it changed? How has it tested our government and our governance? Just looking at the governing party, for instance, if we're talking about local government elections, how has it been challenged in its response to this crisis?
So far, we can say in the main, if you assess across the country, it's the national government that has been in the driving seat, to some degree provincial governments. But when it comes to local government institutions, which are already very weak, as you might see with the Auditor General serial reports, I don't think much has happened. Some of the reasons you do see the crisis in poor areas or in the densely populated townships or rural areas, it's precisely because local government institutions are not operating optimally. And it's been national government intervention. Take the issue of water provision, for example. Within a very short space of time, what could not be done over the years, suddenly we see it happening within weeks. And people will develop taste for this speed delivery mechanism. And once it is withdrawn and they are going back into a situation where they go on for months without water, then you will have challenges. That's why government must never return to where it was. And the local government, including the institution of traditional leadership in rural areas, ought to be strengthened in a very deliberate, targeted fashion.
Just in terms of the electorate itself, has this presented an opportunity for new leaders, rising stars to emerge, and has it allowed them to perhaps sway the electorate in a certain ideological preference?
So far, I would say it is too early to tell, but there is one thing, though, which is very clear, that the state intervention will be seen right across the world, not just in South Africa, as a strong element when you face a crisis. It's not left up to the whims of the market that you see in the US, in China, in Britain, and everywhere else. So that argument to say government should shrink and allow market forces to regulate might actually be the one that will be casualty of this particular period. But at the same time, the partnership that we have seen between government and its social partners such as business, labor, and civil society, I think it's one of the things that ought to be strengthened if we are to face this particular challenge. So but going forward in terms...
Yes, finish your train of thought.
In terms of local government elections, I do think that community leaders who have shown dedication, including some of the political leaders who have shown dedication of mobilizing resources and being there for people, will be easily recognized. But those who loot, who steal, may find no favor from the community coming back to the community for next year elections.
So you mentioned the importance of the role of the state, Prof, and I'm wondering how that particular aspect will then play itself out, because there's already speculation in some quarters about how all of this will impact on the House of the ANC, the governing party itself, especially on some of the policy directives on the state itself and its role.
I do think that once the ANC organize its midterm National General Council or Policy Review Conference, it will become clear, one, the balance of forces. But at the same time, I do think that those who are calling for the radical economic transformation, you are beginning to hear that particular push within the ANC in each one of the statements to say, let's use this opportunity so that the state can intervene in a bold manner. And that in itself, I do think that that is the direction things are turning out to be, because either the state intervene directly or it creates policy environment which allows for greater and faster transformation and inclusive growth.
Is there a danger that the state could be seen as a tool, as an organ for political settlement, an opportunity for the elite rather, to bargain for certain things, that there could be even greater social marginalization or mobilization? And I ask this because we mentioned earlier on that we saw some coalescence within the political party fraternity as a whole, but as we move down to level 4 and we move away from those strict restrictions, the fissures are starting to show again.
Certainly, there is always a danger that when you have a crisis of this nature, the state could intervene and not allow the space for the civil society. We saw this with the September 11th in the US fight against terrorism, where the state interventions, some of which were intrusive, were never let go thereafter. So it is always very important to be vigilant to make sure that state intervention does not compromise our constitutional rights. Of course, our constitutional rights should not make us so paranoid for any state intervention to take place, because that's the other extreme in a liberal philosophy where you say state should not even be there in any big way. So we should not be paranoid about state intervention, but the right balance between state intervention and allowing the civil rights as guaranteed by the Constitution is very important, even in the post-COVID period.
So how are we going to recognize, for instance, the difference between state fragility and resilience as we go through this stage and come out of COVID-19?
If the state itself proves to be strong enough to deal with this current challenge and the ones coming, and it also improves its capacity to deliver, because one of the biggest challenges we had was the state having good policies but weak on delivery. So that is what it ought to do. But at the same time, state ought to look for the social partners where it doesn't have the capacity to make sure that they do implement. Also, fighting corruption is one of those, and clear policy direction. If the state can do those things, then it can manage even the post-COVID crisis period in terms of the socio-economic challenges that we are likely to face. But it has to be honest in so doing and transparent.
So the patterns of inclusion and exclusion arising out of this, how are we going to see that? As in, what are we to expect if you were to make any predictions?
I do think that you are likely going to see some of the social partnerships which are being, carved right now between business, which has come into play in the Solidarity Fund, some of the consultation forums, continuing. But at the same time, there might be a temptation where some in the ruling party may feel less obliged to consult with, let's say, the opposition parties when election period or campaign period is coming closer. That would be a danger, because here what is being forged is a grand coalition for nation building, which should take all different political inputs and lessen the issues of political contestations on each and everything and create an issue of common purpose for now, because this crisis is likely to be with us for the next 2 to 5 or even 10 years.
Thank you so much for speaking to us and sharing your thoughts. Political economist Professor Somadoda Fikeni.